They said the air inside Top Shot felt cleaner than the Colorado wind outside colder. To a square room's worth of winter humming through vents as steady as a metronome. On Highway 83, the glass facade threw back a late afternoon sun, but in here it was all fluorescent clarity and the antiseptic perfume of solvent oil and burned powder. The crack of rifles stuttered in lanes like fireflies blinking on and off, and amid the chrome rails and digital screens stood a man who looked like he had been carved out of walnut in years. Still can't hit the paper old-timer. Maybe you need glasses for your glasses. The voice came bright and mean from 3 stalls left Kyle, hat backward, ego forward, a premium member who dressed his AR like a Christmas tree. Laughter scattered down the firing line, quick and contagious. Roy Brooks didn't answer. He let the sound pass over him like rain over stone, breathed in, breathed out, and lowered the barrel of his old rifle with the patience of an hour hand. The Springfield M21 lay solid in his palms, a dark ribbon of steel and worn walnut that had known sweat salt and seasons. The stock had been handled so long it gleamed the way river stones gleam by touch, not polish. He wore denim and flannel boots that hadn't been fashionable since radios had dials. A relic they thought one more story walking around without a cover. Miller, the range safety officer, watched with that practiced calm people wear when they are almost out of patience. He had a thin mouth and the polite voice of a man who spends his days asking strangers to please follow the rules. In his head, he was already scripting the speech he gave to the overconfident and the undertrained. He hated the part where he had to raise his voice. He hated the part where premium members like Kyle complained to the owner later. He hated the calculations he was always doing between safety and sales. Roy centered his cheek, drew breath like he'd been taught a lifetime ago. Nose, not mouth, bones, steady sling. Snug, and the rifle gave back a single civilized thack. 50 yards away, the paper silhouette stayed clean. Not a moon punch of white torn from black, not even a fringe of paper dust. Kyle's laugh came out louder now, eager for audience. Miller's jaw went tight. Sir, Miller said, stepping into the stall boots, squeaking against polished concrete. I'm going to have to ask what's going on here. You fired several rounds and haven't once hit the target. Roy turned. His eyes were a faded blue, not of surrender, but of distance, the kind water gets when it has seen many skies. I'm hitting it, he said, voice like gravel, sifted by weather. Miller glanced downrange, the paper untouched the electronic screen, waiting for data it had not been given. He lifted a palm. With respect, you're not. We can move you to 25 if you'd like. Pistol lanes open. The condescension arrived dressed as courtesy. Kyle's crew leaned back to watch, grins sharp as bottle caps. Roy set the rifle gently on the bench like he was letting a dog sleep. I'm fine right here. Something in Miller gave. He'd seen holes where they weren't and missed holes where they were, but he'd never seen a man insist on nothing in particular with such stubborn peace. Sir, you're a hazard to yourself and everyone here. I need to see your lane cleared and your weapon secured. Roy's hands, gnarled, mapped with old scars that had forgotten their stories, did not move. The weapon is safe. The lane is clear. Your proficiency says otherwise. Miller gestured him back. Permit an ID, please, and I'm going to inspect the rifle. There was no flare of temper, no bargaining. Roy slid a wallet from his back pocket and set the cards down, his name a quiet thing on plastic. Then reluctantly he lifted the M21, offering it, stock first. It felt heavier than Miller expected, not just mass memory. The wood was warm, almost alive, and on its left flank, a small brass plate caught the cold light. Tarnished thumb-worn, it held a set of faint, hand-scratched lines numbers that looked like they used to point somewhere. Miller's thumb touched the metal. For a breath's length, the range fell away. Heat not cold, rain not air conditioning, green not concrete, a rotor's chop beating the sky into ribbons, and a radio coughing panic. They're in the wire. He blinked hard, and the room returned humming squared ordinary. He cleared his throat, forced to laugh at himself he didn't quite believe. Just an old gun with a vanity plate, he told the part of his mind that had flinched. He set the rifle down out of Roy's reach a little farther than polite. Everything seems in order, he said, tone-clipped. But your shooting is not. I can't let you continue. Behind them, curiosity thickened. People drifted into the gap between shots drawn by the scent of spectacle. Kyle cupped a hand to his mouth as if to amplify wisdom. Call security, Miller. Time to retire Grandpa before he retires someone else. Roy's gaze stayed on the far wall, where a heavy rubber curtain moved with the breath of the ventilation system. In that tiny sway and the whisper of sand behind it, in the math of lines between now and then, he seemed to be measuring something no one else could see. Then he said, not loudly but with the authority of someone who had survived the habit of silence, "Son, I strongly suggest you give me back my rifle." The warning in Roy's voice was calm, but it cut through the noise like a knife pressed flat on glass. Miller felt the weight of it, but his pride shoved the unease down. Around them, Kyle and his friends leaned into their own grins, feeding off the tension. A small crowd had gathered, drawn by curiosity, the way moths circle a light bulb waiting for the pop of something burning. Or what old man Miller shot back, his voice louder than necessary. "You going to challenge me to a game of checkers?" The laughter from Kyle's group was immediate, ugly, the kind of laughter that has no humor in it. Roy did not flinch. He did not shout. He simply kept his eyes fixed down, ranged his hands still on the bench as if they belonged there. And yet, for the first time, someone other than Miller noticed the truth. David Teller, a former Marine, had been trying to ignore Kyle's crew for the better part of an hour. He had a lane 2 stalls over his own rifle, resting quietly, his own target, patterned with neat clusters. He'd seen his share of arrogance at civilian ranges, and he had learned to let most of it slide. But this scene, an old man humiliated a safety officer more concerned with appearances than respect, gnawed at him. David's eyes sharpened on the target wire. Each time the Springfield barked, the paper silhouette remained unmarked, but the thin metal line holding it would tremble, subtle, fleeting, but there. Not random vibration, impact, repetition, precision. David's breath caught. This man wasn't missing at all. He was landing every round on the clamp itself. An impossible demonstration, deliberate and exact. "Miller," David said, his voice low, almost a growl. "He's not missing." But Miller, flushed with authority and the scent of his own indignation, waved him off. "Step back, sir. This is official range business." Kyle elbowed one of his friends, both of them smirking, as though they were watching a sitcom rather than a man's dignity stripped in public. David clenched his jaw. He'd seen this look before, on the faces of young recruits in the Desert Boys who laughed because they didn't know fear yet, and some of them never lived long enough to learn. He pulled out his phone. Not the police, not the range owner. His thumb hovered over a number he had not dialed in years. Then he tapped. The line clicked and a familiar voice, still gravel thick, even with age, answered. "Master Sergeant Evans." "Serge, it's David Teller," David said, turning his back to the growing audience. "I'm at Top Shot on Highway 83. There's an old man here, Roy Brooks, shooting a Springfield M21. The staff is about to throw him out." Evans groaned. "And why exactly is that my problem?" David's voice dropped. "Because he's no ordinary old man. He's different. The way he stands, the way he moves. I've never seen anything like it outside the Corps. I swear he's hitting the wire on purpose." On the other end, the sound of keys tapping. Evans muttered, "Brooks, Roy Brooks." Then silence. Long, sharp silence broken only by Evans's sharp inhale. "Hold on." Meanwhile, Miller doubled down. "Sir, your membership is terminated. Security is on their way. And this rifle," he lifted the Springfield again, hugging it like a trophy, "is being confiscated as evidence." Kyle whooped. "Finally, get him a walker and a bingo card." Roy's composure cracked, but not in anger. Sadness lined his features, as if he'd seen this play before and hated knowing the ending. "Son," he said again, quieter this time, "give me back my rifle." The words landed with an unexpected gravity, even as Kyle cackled. But then across the room, the range doors slammed open. Colonel Ryman entered like a storm in pressed blues, flanked by 4 soldiers, whose presence turned jeering silence into reverent hush. The air shifted, charged. The range was no longer a playground. It was a hall of judgment. Every head turned. Every laugh died. And Miller, still clutching Roy's rifle, suddenly found himself holding history he did not yet understand. The sound of those boots striking concrete was not loud, but it carried. Each click echoed like a gavel, stripping away bravado with every step. The crowd parted without a word. Kyle, once so full of noise, swallowed his smirk like it had burned him. Even the ventilation seemed to hush, as if the very air knew rank when it entered the room. Colonel Richard Ryman's uniform was so crisp the fabric edges caught the fluorescent light. He moved with the same gravity as parade day at Fort Carson, except this was not parade ground. This was an ordinary civilian range, and yet in that moment it felt like a courtroom, a chapel, a place where respect itself stood trial. Ryman's eyes scanned the line steel gray and searching until they found Roy Brooks. His whole demeanor softened in an instant, shifting from stone to reverence. He halted 2 paces in front of the old man and snapped the sharpest salute anyone in that room had ever seen. The motion was a blade through air, perfect, undeniable. "Mr. Brooks," the colonel's voice boomed, making walls vibrate. "Forgive the intrusion, sir. We were informed you were in the area." Roy's response was small, a nod barely there, but it carried weight. He raised a hand just enough to return the salute, not with showmanship, but with the weary grace of a man who has long since stopped needing to prove anything. The gesture was enough. It made Miller's hand tremble on the rifle stock. Ryman turned. His gaze fell on the young officer like a hammer. "Officer," he said, voice low and thunderous, "you are holding a piece of United States military history. Return it immediately." Miller's fingers loosened almost against his will. He passed the rifle back to Roy, who cradled it with a familiarity so natural it was like watching someone slide into their own skin. The walnut gleamed under the harsh lights, that little brass plate, a silent witness to decades. Then the colonel faced the room. "For those of you under a grave misapprehension," he said, each word ringing with indignation, "you stand in the presence of Chief Warrant Officer Roy Brooks, retired. The man you mocked holds the Congressional Medal of Honor for actions during the Vietnam War, actions so critical, so classified, that most of his official citation remains blacked out to this day." The crowd gasped as if pulled by one breath. Kyle's face drained pale. Someone whispered Medal of Honor like the words were too heavy to carry alone. A few heads bowed instinctively. Mr. Brooks served with the Military Assistance Command Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. Ryman continued, letting each syllable fall sharp. A unit of phantoms, men who stepped into impossible missions. His call sign was Ghost, and in 3 tours he never missed. Not once. Ryman walked the line boots, striking rhythm with controlled fury. He gestured down Roy's lane. "You all laughed because you thought he missed. You thought an old man lost his aim. But what you witnessed was mastery so far beyond your comprehension that you mistook genius for error." He stopped at the target stand, paper still pristine. The silence in the room was absolute now, not a cough, not a shuffle. He brushed past the silhouette, ignoring the clean sheet, and moved to the backstop wall. The heavy rubber curtain hung there, black and thick with the scars of years. With one swift motion, he pulled it aside. The crowd leaned forward as if pulled by a magnet. Behind the curtain in the concrete back wall was a hole, small, ragged, dead center of where the target's heart would have been. One shot, number, a tunnel. Proof. "Cease fire on all lanes," Miller croaked, his voice cracking like thin ice. Red lights blinked overhead, ending every civilian's practice session in a heartbeat. Colonel Ryman's gaze cut through the quiet. "Check the bullet trap." His tone was not a request. It was an order that reached into marrow. Miller swallowed, hands shaking, fumbling with the master key. He unlocked the steel door behind the backstop, dragging it open with a screech of metal hinges. Inside lay the sand-filled bin where years of ammunition had been caught and forgotten. But on top of the dull lead slugs sat a sight no one in the room would ever forget. A neat little pile of 10 bullets, each one perfectly mushroomed, fused by force and heat into a single tower of precision. Proof of a shot that defied physics, of a man who did not miss. Ever. The room held its breath. 10 bullets stacked by impact, welded together like some grotesque little sculpture, shimmering faintly under the range lights. Nobody spoke. Even Kyle, whose mouth had rarely stayed shut for more than a few seconds, looked like he might throw up. Colonel Ryman turned slowly, letting the silence do most of the work. His eyes swept the stalls, pausing on Miller, pausing longer on Kyle and his entourage. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with contempt. There are words he said, words like duty, honor, respect. They are not decorations, they are not hashtags. They are the spine of a soldier and the measure of a man. The words hit harder than any rifle report. Kyle stared at his boots. One of his friends shifted uncomfortably, trying to disappear into the wall. Miller's face was pale sweat, already darkening the collar of his uniform polo. Ryman stepped back toward Roy, but his gaze stayed locked on Miller. You judged a man by his years. You mocked him because his dignity was quiet. And in doing so, you disgraced not only yourselves, but this entire establishment. The colonel turned softened and addressed Roy directly. Sir, on behalf of the United States Army, I apologize for the disrespect you have endured here today. We can arrange a private secure range at Fort Carson whenever you wish. Roy shook his head gently, a tired smile tugging the corner of his mouth. No need for that, Colonel. The boy was just overzealous doing his job as he saw it. He's young. He looked at Miller, who flinched. A rifle is only a tool. It's only as good as the man holding it. But a man is only as good as the respect he shows others. Don't forget that, son. The lesson landed heavier than any punishment could. Miller's throat bobbed as he tried to swallow words he couldn't form. And then, like a ripple through memory, the jungle returned. The rain came first, hot and endless, soaking through every seam of a uniform. Helicopters beat the sky into thunder. A radio voice screamed, "They're in the wire, Ghost. High-value target using a civilian as shield. Impossible shot. Repeat, impossible." Roy's younger hands gripped the same rifle knuckles, bloodless. His breath slowed. His eye found not the hostage, not the soldier behind her, but the thin glint of a buckle on her backpack strap, a fraction of an inch. He squeezed. The buckle shattered. The heavy pack dropped, dragging the woman forward just enough. A second round cut the enemy soldier down before his finger ever closed on a trigger. In the aftermath, smoke and rain mingled. His commanding officer pressed something cold into his palm, a brass plate etched with coordinates. The village you saved today, Ghost. Never forget the lives you touch are worth more than the ones you take. The flashback dissolved. Back in the present, Roy's thumb traced that same plate on the M21 stock, worn smooth by 5 decades of memory. The colonel, sensing the shift, gave a subtle nod. The soldiers in dress blues behind him stood straighter, as if anchoring the gravity of the moment. Around the room, the crowd absorbed the truth. This was no relic fumbling at paper. This was a living legend hiding in plain sight, carrying a weight none of them could comprehend. Kyle and his friends looked broken, their arrogance bled dry. One muttered something about needing air. None dared to laugh. Colonel Ryman's voice returned lower now, but steady as a drumbeat. Let this day remind you all, heroes walk among us, often quietly, and respect once lost is not easily regained. In the absolute silence that followed, Roy Brooks stood not triumphant, not smug, just quietly whole, as though the room itself had finally remembered who it was standing before. The aftermath came swiftly. Word traveled faster than gunfire. By the time the range owner hurried in a man in a blazer over jeans, face tight with alarm, half the story had already reached him from trembling staff. His eyes landed on Colonel Ryman, then on Roy Brooks, and his expression collapsed into horror. "Miller," he snapped, "you're finished here." But Roy raised a weathered hand before the young officer could speak. His voice, though quiet, carried authority enough to halt judgment. Don't ruin his life over this. The boy's mistake came from ignorance, not malice. Let him learn. It was mercy in its rawest form, the kind of mercy born only from men who had seen what real ruin looked like. The owner hesitated, then nodded. Miller wasn't fired. Instead, he was stripped of his safety officer title, reassigned to front desk and janitorial duties. His arrogance had been sanded down to something brittle. Kyle and his friends weren't so fortunate. Lifetime bans, their faces discreetly taped behind the counter as a warning. The smugness that once defined them was replaced by silence and shame. For the first time, they understood humiliation, not as a weapon, but as a mirror. In the weeks that followed, Top Shot Range tried to make amends. A new training program was launched, veteran awareness, developed under direct guidance from Colonel Ryman. Every staff member would learn the weight of respect and the meaning of service, and the cost of forgetting either. Posters of local heroes quietly appeared on the walls. Stories of men and women who had served meant to remind customers that not all legends wore uniforms anymore. Roy Brooks didn't return immediately, but one late afternoon the glass door chimed, and there he was, again no rifle case this time, just the quiet presence of a man who never needed a weapon to be seen. He headed not for the lanes but for the small cafe tucked at the building's edge. Behind the counter, Miller froze mid-wipe of a table. Their eyes met across the room. There was no scorn in Roy's gaze, no bitterness, only acknowledgement, steady and peaceful. Miller straightened posture, different now, less cocky, more deliberate. He gave a small nod, genuine and heavy with respect. "Mr. Brooks." Roy returned the nod, faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Son." And just like that, the lesson held. No shouting, no gavel, just the weight of an old soldier's forgiveness, heavier than any punishment could have been. He walked into the cafe, leaving Miller alone with the echo of humility. That silence, Miller realized, was the loudest correction of his life. For those who witnessed it, the story spread like wildfire. Not through headlines, Roy never sought those, but through whispers, through retellings at kitchen tables and veterans' halls. People spoke of the day, a room full of doubters learned the cost of arrogance and the value of respect. Roy Brooks remained what he had always been, a man with steady hands and a quiet heart, carrying history carved into brass. Heroes, after all, rarely announce themselves. They move among us at the supermarket, in a diner booth, on a firing line, reminders that greatness wears ordinary clothes. And maybe that was the real lesson, that respect should not have to be earned with miracles, nor proven with stacked bullets. It should be given freely, because you never know who is standing quietly beside you, carrying a story larger than your imagination. If this story moved you, share it. Leave your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to Veteran Valor, where we honor the quiet heroes who remind us what dignity truly means.